The last episode of FX's acclaimed series based on James Clavell's epic novels teased Englishman John Blackthorne, giving Japanese warlord Yabushige's army a crash course in delivering European-style precision artillery fire. In the episode's shocking final scene, the absent Lord Toranaga's favor-seeking son Nagakato makes use of what he's learned by surprise attacking their enemy Ishido's emissaries with a cannon barrage, an act that will surely bring down massive repercussions, as teased by interpreter Mariko uttering, "It is war." However, before all of that, Blackthorne and Lady Mariko's complicated emotional entanglements still need to be worked out, particularly in light of last week's pillowing. Though Mariko tried to talk him out of it the next morning, it seems more and more clear that she was the one who crept into Blackthorne's chamber that night. Many factors contribute to her reasons for keeping quiet, including the eightfold fence that we frequently hear about. As we see this week in Chapter 5, Broken to the Fist, Mariko's ability to hold her personal affections for an outsider in check could be crucial to both her and Blackthorne's continued existence. Now, I doubt that anyone can claim to have been successfully taken aback when Buntaro, Mariko's husband, a guy that earlier episodes made a concerted effort to convince us was dead, rode out of the mist and into a Jiro. The fact that Buntaro was thought to be dead and missing for the previous 20 days was more shocking than the fact that he managed to get to Edo and meet up with Toranaga. Why did it seem like so much more time had elapsed before Blackthorne and Mariko truly succumbed to the tension concealed behind all those yearning glances? Following these two shocking events, her husband's return presents a chance for rich drama. Although this week's episode didn't attempt to match last week's in terms of graphic violence, it did move the plot along by disclosing at least one crucial backstory. Buntaro, who appears slightly more battered and wounded despite having avoided death, is grudgingly made to share a roof with Mariko, who has already been assigned to live with Blackthorne in the house Toranaga gave him in a Jiro. It's hard to blame any Japanese for turning up their noses in favor of their favorite foods, given that Blackthorne's concept of hospitality entails serving the most disgusting rabbit stew for dinner and letting a dead pheasant stink up the home. When a bit more sake is added to the dinner, Blackthorne and Buntaro's strange defensive energy only begins to get stranger and full of barely restrained machismo, while Mariko tries to serve as a translator between them. Before long, the two men are consuming large amounts of the fermented drink, clearly drunk and obviously headed for a tragic outcome. However, Mariko is the only one who ends up revealing more than she probably even anticipated to, as the tension throughout dinner escalates when Blackthorne keeps asking Buntaro to tell him a tale of how he escaped. Though it's too late, Mariko, who has already endured years of being married to this man, cautions him against provoking Buntaro's wrath more. A servant is ordered to fetch a bow to Buntaro, who then asks Blackthorne to select whatever pillar in the doorway he wants to fire his arrows at. Unconsciously, Blackthorne selects the appropriate one, which also happens to be the one that Mariko is seated in front of. Despite Buntaro's inability to see clearly due to his increasing inebriation during the night, Mariko refuses to step aside despite Blackthorne's cries for him to do so. Before collapsing into a drunken heap on the floor, her spouse fires 2 arrows, one after the other, so close to her face that the fletching almost skims her nose. As Buntaro coolly pours himself another bowl of sake, and everyone sits there in shock following that exhibition, Blackthorne asks Mariko to remind her husband that his wife deserves better treatment than what has just transpired. Blackthorne is perplexed by Buntaro's mockery of Mariko's notion of showing her any genuine civility, until Mariko goes on to reveal to him, as directed by her husband, the truth about her family background. Mariko's father, who had served a cruel and oppressive Taiko, killed his master in the sake of justice, but as a result of his deeds, Mariko's family was persecuted and killed. Before her father executed them all quickly and committed seppuku himself, he made her brothers, sisters, and even her mother kneel before him. But every year on the anniversary of her family's killings, Mariko asks her husband to let her take action against this injustice. Mariko, on the other hand, was not allowed to participate in the rite because she was a Nuliud. Regretfully, Buntaro prohibits her from dying with her family, as Mariko sobs as she says, "My husband orders me to live." When Blackthorne has had enough, she brings up the eightfold fence and asks him to suppress his emotions for the benefit of both of them. Later that evening, when Blackthorne discovers Buntaro violently abusing Mariko in their room, he makes an ill-advised attempt to confront him by chasing Buntaro through the village's streets. However, Buntaro declines to engage in combat. blaming their evening's sake consumption. It becomes evident that this isn't the final confrontation between the two that will occur during the show as Blackthorn walks away after realizing he can't, in good conscience, strike an unarmed guy. In the midst of all of this, there's still the dead bird to deal with. Blackthorn receives a pheasant from Toranaga as a thank you gift, and the pilot says he wants the house to properly prepare the bird so it can be eaten later. But in terms of English tradition, it implies hanging the pheasant outside to mature for a week or more, after which it is most likely dressed and eaten as part of a feast. The only issue is that the pheasant will eventually begin to rot, and when that occurs, it will emit an utterly terrible stink, as Fuji so perceptively notes at the opening of the episode. To all the house servants, even the stooping gardener Yujiro Blackthorn, however, is adamant that things be done his way for once, and he informs them in weak Japanese that it is forbidden to touch the pheasant before then, if touch, die. Ever from the premiere, Shogun has adeptly employed language to emphasize tension, create lighthearted moments, and offer a deeper comprehension of this unfamiliar territory, all while drawing attention to the cultural gap that separates Blackthorn and the Japanese. Mariko is one of the most powerful characters in the series because of her ability to understand what everyone is saying in a scene. She has influence in multiple domains because of her fluency in both Portuguese and Japanese, which is translated as English for viewers. There are times when every word that is said is understood exactly as intended, and there are other times when someone has deliberately decided to misinterpret the words of another in order to make them appear worse than they actually are. Blackthorn gradually starts to become more fluent in Japanese, or at least he's able to communicate enough to get by. But broken to the fist is the first significant occasion in which he realizes he can't just say anything comes to mind. When combined with Buntaro's homecoming, the dead pheasant could run the risk of being overly symbolic. But it's also kind of interesting, especially as he appears to be the only person the black flies are genuinely circling aside from the decaying bird itself. Even though he has already narrowly avoided death on a few occasions, this could be a premonition of his actual demise, given that the series is just halfway done. However, this week's victim of death, whether sudden or not, isn't Buntaro. Rather, it's the gardener Yujiro. Blackthorn gave the order for the rest of the house to not touch the rotting bird, but Yujiro offered to take it because he knew that breaking the order would result in death, as Mariko later tells him. Having fallen ill recently, he took the pheasant knowing full well what would happen. "It meant nothing to me," a numbly insistent Blackthorn says. "Your words give it meaning," Mariko responds. Unbeknownst to many, though, Yujiro's death also has another purpose, and while Blackthorn laments his alleged part in an elderly man's death, the gardener turns out to be a useful loose end all by himself. Yabushige and his nephew Omi have been looking into the evidence pertaining to a surreptitious spy Nejiro who has been communicating with Toranaga all along. Conveniently, the messages are hidden in Yujiro's house and discovered only after the man has passed away. This allows Toranaga's actual spy, the fisherman, and ex-samurai Miraji, to carry out his illegal operations. You can hardly blame Blackthorn for deciding he wants to leave Japan forever after Yujiro's death and that disastrous supper with Buntaro. He doesn't think twice to share this opinion with Toranaga when he has the chance to see his lord face to face. But Toranaga says he can't be bothered with this nonsense and walks across the field to let Blackthorn and Mariko work things out. Toranaga seems to perceive the tension between the two of them, even going so far as to refer to a shadow hovering over them. However, a dramatic dispersal of birds from the tree line, more birds, indicates that a much worse calamity is coming to befall everyone. Do you recall the tiny earthquake Blackthorn felt not too long ago? That pales in comparison to the massive kahuna that strikes out of nowhere. In the midst of it all, a landslide carries Toranaga himself over the edge as the ground trembles and splits and men are instantly engulfed by the earth. After Blackthorn, Mariko, and Negakato successfully extract him, the Lord is left without his swords until Blackthorn chooses to give him the ones that Fuji gave him in the previous episode. The most of our primary protagonists appear to be in good physical condition, but Eijiro is in disarray after the earthquake, and when Blackthorn returns home in a daze, he discovers that Fuji has been hurt in the commotion. He walks out into the garden and starts putting the rocks back together the way he used to see Yujiro do, while silently assessing the devastation the phenomena has left behind. It appears that Blackthorn will not be scheduling his one-way flight out of Japan anytime soon. But back in Osaka, Toranaga's adversaries only appear to be multiplying, particularly after Lord Ishido discovers Josen's skull in a box when he opens the most recent shipment he received. At about the same time, Lady Ochiba, the consort of the late Teiko, travels to the city and meets with Ishido face-to-face late at night to express her gratitude for bringing her son back. Considering everything, it appears that the two of them teaming up will only be disastrous for Toranaga, particularly as Ochiba appears to be acting solely to secure her son's succession as the new emperor. Now that she's emphatically informing Ishido that the Council of Regents must follow her orders, what secret plans does she have up her sleeve? To find out exactly what Ochiba's plan could entail for Toranaga and Ishido, we'll have to wait until next week's episode.